Why me, Lord? We get confused. But something else happens. Somebody even used this word. Was that you that said empty? Empty. And emptiness makes us feel deprived. Deprived. I want to invite your attention for this point to the book of Isaiah. And I want you to look with me at chapter 38. This, of course, is the account of Hezekiah, the king of Judah, being told that he was about to die. And even the prophet told him to set his house in order, or he would die and not live, verse 1. Hezekiah rolled over on his bed and started praying. And the Lord allowed him to live 15 more years. There is a messianic reason for that addition to Hezekiah's life. And so I cannot read this passage and think, if I pray exactly right, I can get 15 more years. Hezekiah had no offspring. And Hezekiah sat on the throne in Jerusalem out of the house of David. He would have been the last in the seed line of Christ had he died. There would have been no Messiah. And so Manasseh is allowed to be born. And then when Manasseh is about 12, Hezekiah did die. But there was then a successor in the house of David. But nevertheless, when Hezekiah was told he would die, he begins to express something. He is a model for us of what emptiness does to us when we lose something. Verse 9, chapter 38. This is a model of grief and the feelings that it can cause. The writing of Hezekiah, king of Judah, when he had been sick and was recovered of his sickness. He got over it because of Isaiah's ability to make a poultice out of figs and treat whatever it was that was bothering Hezekiah. I guess we could call him Dr. Isaiah, could we not? He said, but when I got through the process, I decided to write about it. And here's how he felt at the time he was told that he would not live. I said, verse 16, notice it. I said, in the cutting off of my days, I'm going to die prematurely. That's impossible. You can't die before you die. When we use the term premature death, we mean we thought he was too young. And Hezekiah felt that way about himself. He cut off my days. I should have lived longer. Well, Hezekiah knows now he's still living. But at that time, how did he feel? God, you're going to let me die when I'm too young. I am deprived of the residue of my years. Notice the feeling he had, the emptiness, the nothingness, the futility, the confusion. I should live longer, shouldn't I? I said, notice that, I shall not see the Lord, even the Lord in the land of the living. He started to bargain with God. You know, God, you let me live longer, I'll serve you longer. Watch the process. He repeats it. My age is departed. I have cut off like a weaver my life. He blames God. Will cut me off with pining sickness, verse 12. You will make an end of me from day to night. You're going to cause me to suffer. He's blaming God for all of this. When in fact, it was just a sickness. People get them, you know. God's going to break all my bones, verse 13. He's frustrated, empty, confused, angry. He doesn't like this that's happening to him. And then he is reminded of something. He said, I sounded like a crane or a swallow, so did I chatter. I just kept talking because I didn't know what else to do. I was so confused, so angry, so empty. He must have told everybody around him how he felt. Because he says here he just kept on talking and chattering like birds. I kept looking upward. Please, God. Help me. Now, listen to this. He's been blaming God for his problem, and all of a sudden he stops and asks God. He's going through the process. Nothing irregular here or abnormal. It's unique to Hezekiah. You and I might not write it this way, but some of his feelings can be our feelings. What shall I say? What did I learn from all this? I shall go softly all my years, regretting what I said in the bitterness of my soul. Instead of having peace through the process, he had great bitterness. What happens is called a process. No person alive can cope with grief. We are going to talk a bit about managing it, and I like that word in the sense that maybe I can learn how to endure it. But cope, that's not going to happen. However, we can find some comfort a person cannot manage grief in the sense of eliminating it. A person cannot change the situation that happened. In fact, I want you to allow yourself a luxury. If you've lost somebody or something or your job or whatever it was you lost, you have a right to feel the way you do. It's real. Nothing unreal about it. And I do not know what you're going through. I have no idea. Because again, let me repeat this, and I'll repeat it in the next session. Grief is unique to every individual. Each one of us does it differently from someone else. I have a poem here called I Will Be Remembered. Brother Chad, you took the poem away. You're going to have to go to the other thing now, the other stick. If you would, please. Chad, I got to change to the other one. Yes. This is the end of this. No, it isn't either. Hold on. The Bible teaching about grief is that it occurs in everybody. It isn't unusual. But several years ago, Catherine Kubler-Ross wrote a book called Death and Dying. And she insisted that there were stages of grief. She lists 5. Chad has a copy of that poem I just ran through there for you, if you'd like to get one later on. In fact, we need to have to give you some copies. We'll give you one of those, because in the last session today, we're going to take a little quiz. You can pass it. Don't worry about it. It'll be all right. You'll get there. But she insisted that people go through these stages and then they're done. Well, to be fair to her, she didn't quite say then they're done, but she did say they have to go through these stages. You may go through any of them or all of them or just one or two of them. But we don't think in terms of 5 stages anymore. We think in terms of 10 stages. When my grandson died, I began to read the material of a man named Daniel Wolfert. Daniel Wolfert is a thanatologist. Thanatos is the Greek word for separation. It is translated death in your New Testament. He's a studier of that which affects us when someone dies. He teaches it at university. You can take a course now at university called thanatology, and you can study these things. But Wolfert points out there are probably 10 stages. And here's the problem. When we are grieving, we can have physical problems. I recommend anyone going through grief that you consult your medical doctor, and if it's getting so painful you can't sleep at night, you need something from him to help you. You don't need something so powerful that you can't quit using it, but you need something from him to help you, because you're going to have some physical consequences. I did a funeral for a young father one time who had a son that was 14 years old. When I got to the house, that 14-year-old was out in the backyard with an axe chopping wood. What happened? He did something that many do when they lose a loved one. He tried to imagine that he was taking his father's place. In fact, he had gotten so full of grief that he was trying to be his father, to replace that emptiness he felt by imagining that he was still his dad. And that boy stayed out in that backyard for at least 3 hours chopping wood until he got so exhausted he had to stop. It happens. We have all kinds of physical problems that can occur. Not always, but they can. I know a boy, an 8-year-old boy, whose grandfather died, and the grandfather slipped off of on which he was sitting, hit his head on the floor, and a big lump was on the grandfather's head right there. As he died, he hit his head on the floor. That boy developed a bump on his head right there. Nobody could ever explain that. I'm the one that developed the bump. To this day, I don't know what happened. I don't remember hitting my head. But physically, we do these things to ourselves sometimes. So you can have physical problems. But notice, you not only can have physical problems, you can be, and most often are, injured emotionally. Thousands of thoughts go through your head. Thousands of emotions come to the surface. Pain. We've just been reading about Hezekiah. And he said, God, he's going to kill me. That's what he's going to do. He's going to break my bones, and he's going to make me suffer day and night. And he's so frustrated and so empty that he gives us a great description of what this feels like. But not everybody reacts that way. David, the king like the nation's kings, who thought he had the power of life and death and love, David mourned for his dying son. I mean, he was grieving. His son died. David washed his face, got himself presentable, and went and ate dinner. And the people thought, well, he must not love his son very much. Look what he did. No, it's how David handled it. It's what he did. Can't fault him. Some people cry at funerals, some don't. I have a memory of a funeral I held one time where the daughter of the man that had died jumped into the casket, screaming. Normal reaction, that's the way she felt. Nothing unusual about that. Maybe to you because you didn't do it, but for her it was normal. We can be hurt emotionally. You can get to the point where you don't want anyone talking to you, because everything they say to you, you don't want to hear. But not only can we suffer emotionally, we can suffer in our thought processes. We start thinking in a confused way, and one day, all of a sudden, we realize What did his voice sound like? And I try to remember his face, and it won't come to me. Because your mind is trying to suppress the pain. It almost gets to the point where you have to go grab a picture so you can remember. Because the pain is so bad and your mind can't stand it. So it tries to shut down all of that. As time goes by and the process starts to heal somewhat, the pain gets less severe, still there. Then it's the case that you are in a recovering kind of situation. However, you never, say never. Say never. Say it loud. Never. Tell the Baptist down the street. Come on. Never. Never. Say it again. Never. You never. Never. Come on. Never. Again. Never. Are you ready? Never. Never. Get over grieving. You may go to work one day and somebody will try to avoid you because they don't want to be part of your grief. And they may even say to you, get over it. It's time for you to get busy and get over it. You know what happens when you get busy? You have a person who's grieving busy. I don't want anyone ever to say to me, Keith, get over grieving for your grandson. I will not forget him. I will not do it. And you're making me angrier when you tell me that. I'm not going to get over him. I remember his face just as clearly today. I remember the wrap that my mother made for him, knitted for him, in which we buried him. I have all those clear pictures right here. It's treasure to me. You're not going to take that away from me. And I'm not going to try to take it away from you. I'm going to understand the emotions of this moment, what's going on there, and the way you're thinking. It's all confused. Sometimes our attitudes change. Leave me alone. Bobby, do the symptoms of PTSD go through any of this? All of it or some of it? All of it. You know what PTSD is? Post-traumatic stress syndrome. Bobby Gayton's here today. You need to get a copy of his book. He was a Vietnam veteran, and he knows what PTSD does, and he writes it from the standpoint of a Christian and how he overcame so that he can function. I don't think Bobby's ever lost his memories of Vietnam, but he can function now, and he teaches you how in that book. That's a great booklet. You got any with you? No? What good are you? Oh, they got to be reprinted. Well, that's good. That's great. That's great. That's wonderful. Lots of pain and suffering in this life. If you're in a situation like this and you don't want to talk to me, I'm just going to sit there silently. But I'm going to be there. Here's a big problem. I've heard this story. I heard one just a minute ago from a father whose son died. And the mother said, there can't be any God. Otherwise, why would my son have died? Spiritually, we start to hurt. Brothers and sisters, in the session coming up after this one, the one just before lunch, I want to talk to us a lot about things we should not say to people when they're grieving, and things we can and should say. But one thing we can do is, today's the funeral. Lots of folks are around. Everybody's brought food in. The people who are going through this don't have time to turn around. It's busy all day long, and then all of a sudden everybody leaves. And I'm all alone with my thoughts. A brother at Forest Hill, Ernie Essery, his wife died. About 3 months after she died, I said, Ernie, you're functioning better now than when we first talked. He said, sure, Keith, but you don't see me at night. You know when they really need us? The day after the funeral, the week after the funeral, the months after the funeral. They need a hug. They need an I'm thinking about you. Pain. Pain. Oh, it hurts, Keith. I know it. I've got a little poem I'll give you today called, I said, God, it hurts, and God said, I know. It does hurt. There's nothing abnormal about that hurt. And so we can help people maybe spiritually by being there, letting them know they're loved and cared for. Jim Merle's here today, and I told him just a moment ago, every day in chapel, his name is mentioned on our prayer list. We're trying just to be there. It's all we can do. I thought I would let you write this in your notes if you'd like. But I like that word normal. However you responded to what happened, and I don't know what it was, but however you responded to it, it was normal. You can even doubt. That's normal. You can ask, why God? Or why me? That's normal. Or why didn't you help me, God? That's normal. Let's go to Psalm 23. I'm going to preach on this psalm tomorrow morning in the worship hour. Chad, back about 1985 maybe, or 86, Paul's saying that the East Hill Church of Christ in Pulaski, Tennessee, asked me to come and hold a gospel meeting. Oh, I was excited. I love to be around Paul saying. I knew his father, Harold. I met Harold in the hospital after he'd suffered his first heart attack. And we got to talking, got close over the time that he had left. One day when I was in that hospital room, I mentioned to Brother Sane, Harold Sane, I said, you have written a biography of half of your life. That's what it's called, one half of my life. I said, where can I find a copy? He said, it's out of print. Well, David, Paul's older brother, was in that room that day. Next thing I knew, in the mail came David's own personally autographed copy from his dad to me, wrapped there and sent it to me. Next time I saw David, I said, David, you can't give me this. He said, no, I want you to have that. That's the Sane family. And they're really sane. You'll hear some sane sermons when you hear them preach. Paul and David will be on our lectureship. First Sunday, the last Sunday in March. David in the morning, Paul at night. Kind of bookends, get us started right. It's a shame they can't preach, though. I came in Wednesday morning to the church building the week I was holding that meeting in Pulaski, and everybody was crying. In tears. What in the world happened? Carolyn Foster. Well, I said, I just saw her last night. Talked to her. And said a dumb thing. The last thing I ever said to Carolyn Foster was, it's cold in here, isn't it? Now, how about that memory? And I'm thinking, I should have said something else, but I didn't know she was going to be murdered the next day. But I started that little guilty thing that goes on in suffering and grief. Why didn't I say, well, I couldn't have said, I didn't know. But that's how my mind got to thinking. Cognitively, I had a problem. A student had walked in and shot her to death. She was a school teacher. He also killed a 13-year-old student girl. shot another teacher before the coach there wrestled the boy to the ground, took his gun away. That boy's still in prison. Her family had converted him to the Lord. CNN, ABC, CBS, and all these folks showed up that day to interview there at the church building. We had the high school students over to counsel with them, talk to them, try to help them. First day, though, it's too fresh. We weren't really doing a lot of good, I don't know. But CNN and ABC and CBS and what's the other one? I'm leaving out one, the major. NBC, the nutty broadcasting company. I don't know what the... Anyways, they're so liberal they don't know when they're telling the truth or not. None of them do. They all showed up. They wanted to film part of the assembly that night. So I thought, I can't preach the sermon I had in mind. I preached on the 23rd Psalm. That particular CD, they give it away. I think they've given away several thousand of them over the years. Of that sermon on the 23rd Psalm. I want you to hear it tomorrow. It's the only one I have that people ask me to do again. So I want you to hear it. But notice that statement. Years ago in high school, I was walking home with a classmate of mine, and he said, "You know what's so frightening about death, Keith?" And I don't know what brought that up. I said, "Why, are you planning to die? What's the problem?" You know how you are when you're young children. He said, "No." He said, "The hardest part is you have to do it all by yourself." No, you don't. You don't have to do it alone. Somebody's going to go with you. We have a picture of what happens in the 16th chapter of Luke. And an angel came and took Lazarus where? Abraham's bosom. For the Christian, we expect to see an angel in that process. If you don't see an angel, it's too late. But we don't do this alone. That's the point. I don't want that right now. I'm going to do this without the overhead. Is that all right? I want to talk about Catherine Kubler-Ross's phases of grief. First, she talked about the Nile. That is not a river in Egypt. That's not a river in Egypt. It's bad when you have to ask for the laugh, isn't it? The first reaction when you are informed of the death of a loved one, the mind starts saying, this can't really have happened. It's a way of keeping you from the kind of shock that could injure you. God made you that way. It's a protective reaction. These phases or stages of loss and grief are universal. Everybody experiences one or more of these, or maybe all of them, but never in any order, and they recur and recur and recur. We spend different lengths of time in each phase. We stay in denial too long, however. We need some professional help. Because then the grief becomes complicated or pathological, and it's beyond the help of anything that I could give you in a seminar like this. If you're still in denial, that it didn't really happen, and that happens once in a great while, because this thing is a defense mechanism. You want to block out the thought, block out the words, block out the situation, and it's a temporary response to a terrible message. But in her book, Catherine did get to this point. Whenever I start to wear off in this stage of shock and denial and unbelief, when that starts to wear away and the pain starts coming, we're not ready for it. And because psychologically we're not ready for it, that's when the anger starts. That's when the whys start. That's when we start to redirect this vulnerability in our minds, and we express it in anger of some kind, or we just keep it silently in anger. Whatever's going on, it's the reaction to when the pain comes. Sometimes you can aim your pain at inanimate objects. What was that boy doing chopping wood? I have watched people punch a hole in the wall in their houses. Would all of you like some free I have my doctorate's in behaviorism. Would you like some free psychological advice? It's $125 an hour if you come into the office. Don't have that much money? John does. Borrow it from him. He'll pay for it. Here's some free advice. How many of you own a card table? Or any old table for that matter? Everybody have a table? Some of you aren't raising your hands. Could I go down to the store and buy you one? Or how are you doing? You know you always have my sympathy. I know to whom you're married. That's Ryan Manning's wife there. Okay, everybody got a table? How many of you got the newspaper? None? How about a magazine? Roll it up. You got it? And get over there to that table. Okay, I'm angry at my husband. Sister Manning, you ready? Don't let anybody see you do this. They'll put you in a place. We do this in the office. You start beating that table. Now talk to it. If that Jerry doesn't stop doing that, and God, I don't understand why he died. Won't make your thoughts go away, but you'll feel better. Because you took the pain, watch it, from here out here. You took the pain from here out here. When my grandson died, my daughter-in-law, who is Winfred Claiborne's niece, incidentally, International Gospel Hour, got on her stationary bike, and she imagined that that boy's doctors were in front of her, and she ran over every one of them. They made a lot of mistakes, Ed. A lot of mistakes. In fact, I would say that they were the reason that the boy died. And I think I could prove that to you, but I don't have time today. But here's what was she doing? She was taking the pain from here, where? Out here. You know, it's better to beat a card table than your husband. Yeah. But it releases a little bit of that pain and that anger. Anger is what starts, or the pain starts, the anger starts. Right after I get over the shock, something else hits me. What a process. I've watched people throw things. They got so angry when someone died. Emotionally or intellectually, I know that person's not to be blamed for leaving, but emotionally, I'm angry at him for leaving. Or I'm angry at whomever I thought took him. You ever heard that expression, God took my husband? What do you mean by that? Now, if you mean that God took him home, that's wonderful. If you mean that God killed him, you've got a problem theologically. Let's get 2 Peter 3:9. God is not willing that any should what? Perish, but that all should come to repentance. He's not in the business. There is a being that wouldn't like you to die before you ever became a Christian, but not God. So I don't know what you mean when you say God took my husband. I hope you mean he took him home with him. And that would be all right. Back in the 1990s, well, way back in the 1970s, Malcolm Leith and I worked together at the Craig Avenue Church of Christ. Malcolm Leith was the finest personal worker I've ever been around. The man could get a Bible study. I got a call one day that he was dead. What happened? Malcolm liked to make little wooden things for his grandchildren. And so there was a dump about 2 miles from his house where they threw away scrap wood. He would go down there, gather some of it, and make whatever for his grandchildren, little toys or whatever. Well, he went down this particular day to the garbage dump. And as we pieced the story together later, there was a crazy fellow down there, and I do mean crazy, who ordered Malcolm to run out into the dump, and he was going to hunt him. The man about whom I'm speaking is still in the hospital. In the prison. He needs never to get out. Malcolm had not taken his hearing aid with him. I don't know if he didn't hear what the fellow said or if he just refused. That fellow emptied a 50-round clip into Malcolm. 50 rounds. At the funeral, you remember 1 Corinthians 10:13 a while ago? There is no trial taken you but such as is common to man. At the funeral, a denominational preacher walked up to Martha, Malcolm's widow. He talked to her for a few minutes, and then he said this: "After all, Martha, God doesn't put on us any more than we're able to bear." You don't want to say that to an angry person. And she was angry. And it took her years even to let that subside. Wouldn't you be angry at someone who murdered your mate? Martha looked at that denominational preacher and said to him, "Are you telling me that if I hadn't been so faithful to the Lord, Malcolm would still be living?" You see what that says when you say God doesn't put on me any more than I'm able to bear? The more faithful I get, the more suffering I get. It's true that all that live godly in Christ Jesus shall suffer persecution, but it doesn't say he keeps piling it on either. See how faithful we are. That doesn't happen. Malcolm was murdered because he was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and there was a man there with evil on his mind. At that funeral, Chad, out there on, it's the Memphis Funeral Home out there on Witten Road. It's called Memphis Funeral Home East. At that funeral, there were so many people there that they were standing outside in the parking lot, and they opened it up and made the sound louder so they could hear it out there. He was so well loved and so well liked, and murdered. But God doesn't put on us any. Let's just stop right there, because God doesn't put on us. What happened here? Oh, I know what I did there. Anger. You know, that doctor we had, he diagnosed it, but he wasn't able to cure my loved one. I don't like him very much. Now, what happens now? Here it comes. Keith, I may have caused this today in you. I hope not. I'm going through this pain reaction. I'm angry. And all of a sudden, I start feeling guilty because I'm angry. And I don't like that feeling either. I don't get it. Why am I so guilty? I held a funeral for 2 ladies. Same day. And you know what we do after a funeral? We go to the house and we eat, right? Well, I wasn't going to eat 2 meals. In fact, I didn't eat either place. But when I got to talk to the son of the one lady, he said, "You know, it's so cold here. I should have sent my mother to Florida for the winter. She'd still be living. I didn't say anything. Nothing Ken said. He's feeling guilty. I go to the next house. Son there. You know what he said to me? If I hadn't sent my mother to Florida, she wouldn't have gotten that disease down there. Oh, I learned a lot that afternoon about grief. I didn't get a chance to say goodbye. Actually, that one has helped me. Every time I leave that house, I hug her and say, if I don't see you later, you know I love you. I can avoid that guilt trip. Sometimes you can't. Sometimes it happens before you're ready for it to happen. Well, we shouldn't have let her. I wish I had. Guilt. Normal feeling. I wish those last few minutes had. I was standing in a hallway at the Baptist hospital, which has been blown up and torn down since then, down in Memphis. There's one out east now, one in South Haven. But I'm standing in the hallway, and the lady in the room was just told that she was terminally ill. When I went in the room, she was crying, and she went like this to me. So I walked over to the bed. I bent over, and she grabbed both my ears. She pulled my face down about that far from hers and screamed at me, "What am I going to do? What am I going to do? What am I going to do?" I'm very spiritual. I thought, you're going to let go of my ears. I did. That's exactly what I thought. But I looked into her eyes, and I saw the terror of grief. For real. This is a member of the church. Oh, but we're exempt from those kinds of feelings. We should take it like a man. Stand up, don't cry. Would you open to Philippians 4 for me, with me for a moment? Philippians, the 4th chapter. That's in the New Testament, Bob. Found it, huh? I said 4, chapter 2. I want chapter 2, not 4. I'm old. You'll have to forgive me for being senile. I'm so old, I remember when the rainbow was black and white. I told that to Bones Watson one time at Forest Hill. Bones has left us to go to paradise. And he said, I'm older than that, Keith. I remember when it was straight. You remember Bones, Jerry? Yeah, sounds like him, doesn't it? I want you to notice this is an apostle of the Lord. Would you say Paul was faithful to Christ? Oh my, he is a great exemplar for us in Christianity, isn't he? Watch. This is about a man named Epaphroditus who was the preacher at Philippi. And here's Paul now told that Epaphroditus nearly died. Listen to what Paul says. Yet I supposed it necessary to send to you Epaphroditus, my brother, companion in labor, fellow soldier, but your preacher, your messenger, and he also ministered to my wants. For he longed after you all and was full of heaviness because that ye had heard that he had been sick. Epaphroditus didn't want to worry his brothers and sisters. It wouldn't have mattered to him that it wasn't announced in assembly on Sunday morning that he was sick. He didn't want it announced. He didn't want them to worry about him. Watch what Paul says about himself, though. For indeed he was sick nigh unto death, but God had mercy on him, and not on me only, lest I should have sorrow upon sorrow. At the Sunny Slope Lectures in Paducah, Kentucky this year, they asked me to preach on the subject, I want to go to heaven, but not right now. And I think what they wanted me to do was to tell how unchristian that thought is. that I want to go to heaven, but I don't want to go right now. I heard two Christians talking one day, and one said, "You're getting older," and the other said, "Well, considering the alternative." And I thought, but the alternative is paradise. But we as human beings and Christians, believe it or not, are human beings, suffer. We sorrow. Brothers and sisters, could we start believing that there is nothing wrong with a Christian's weeping at a funeral? I read about a funeral which my Lord attended of a friend of his. In fact, he didn't even get to the funeral. The Lord waited till he died. Got there, and the sister said, "You know, if you'd been here, he wouldn't be dead." He said, "I'm the resurrection and the life. You believe that?" Both the sisters said yes. You remember what Jesus did standing there looking at that tomb? Shortest verse in the English language. What's it say? Jesus wept. Paul said, if Epaphroditus had died, I would have had sorrow. What's wrong with you, Paul? Aren't you a good Christian? Don't you know that person's in paradise? Saturday, Walls, Mississippi, where I used to live. I live in South Haven now, but we didn't move. South Haven annexed us. I used to live in Walls. People accuse me of preaching to the walls. I think I still do. We're moving into this congregation, unloading the truck. Somebody pulled in my driveway. They said Richard Martin was just killed. Richard was a member of the church there. I knew him. I had never done a funeral. And I haven't even moved into the place yet, and I've got to get this funeral ready. But I was a graduate of the Memphis School of Preaching, and I knew everything. I knew nothing. I got some sermon up. I don't know what it was even. But after that funeral, the next day, Doris, his widow, came to the house to talk. And I gave her all the platitudes. Aren't we grateful that Richard's in paradise? And aren't you grateful he was a Christian? And aren't you comforted by the fact that I'm a gospel preacher, you know. I got all the answers. Doris opened my eyes and told me how stupid I was. She didn't say I was stupid. What she said was, "That's fine, Keith, but what about me?" That's fine, Keith, but what about me? Sometimes, as part of the grieving process, people try to bargain with God. We call it bargaining, but they're really trying to swap the feeling for something else. And that's why when someone's grieving, you hear this kind of a statement, "If only we'd taken him to the doctor sooner. If only we'd gotten another opinion from the doctor. If only I had tried to be better toward him. If only I..." Yes, Keith. But what about me? When we come back from a 10-minute break, we'll take care of some of these things we should say and shouldn't say. I appreciate the kind attention. Thank you very much. In fact, I haven't said it yet, but I'm glad to be here. Of course, at my age, I'm glad to be anywhere. So. Oops. It's good to be had. Is that the...